Hey, new scientists, Dr. Chernoff here, and welcome back to Statistics for the New Social Scientist. So in this video, we're going to talk about data management. So we're going to talk about getting organized and then taking our data and putting it into SPSS. So let's get to it. So here you'll notice that I've got just my normal desktop opened. So even before we even get to SPSS, we need to think about data management as just a process of getting organized. So in this course, there are going to be a lot of files, there are going to be a lot of folders. So you want to make sure that you take all that information and you organize it in some systematic way. That way, when you need those files again, you know where they are and they're easy for you to identify. So if you look at my downloads folder, this kind of is like a typical downloads folder, right? It's just full of junk. So, when it comes to this course, you don't want to just like save your stuff to the downloads folder. You want to actually put it somewhere where you can retrieve it when you need it. So for me, what I recommend is that you go to your documents folder and then you create some kind of folder for the course. So you can title it SOC 305. And then within that folder, you want to include a folder called a working directory folder. So I say, all the kind of typical files you might want to save for SOC 305, those you can just kind of keep in your SOC 305 folder. So here I've got a PDF file that contains all of the responses to the surveys that I collected. So that's more of kind of like a file that I might need, but I don't really need to save it anywhere specific, so I'll just keep it in the main general folder. But what I've got here is this working directory folder. And what I like to do is make sure that this folder is all about SPSS files and output. So anything that's produced by SPSS that I want to save, and then maybe I want to access later, that goes in this folder. So if you notice here, I've got this file here called Fear of Crime Database Clean. So sometimes when we're going to be analyzing data, what we can do is we can just open up a database folder file just by double clicking on it. So if you happen to have a file of data that you've already cleaned, you've already processed, and it's already ready to go, then all you need to do is just double click on it, and then SPSS will open up and you'll see all of your data. So if you look here, I've got this spreadsheet looking window. It's got rows, it's got columns, and inside each one of these cells are values that were reported to me by students on campus. So if you're in that situation where you've already cleaned your data and you're all ready to go, then in order to open up that SPSS file, all you have to do is just double click on it. However, if you're going to be taking some data that you've just collected and you want to put that into SPSS, then you've got to open up SPSS and enter it all in from scratch. So if you want to open up SPSS, you can do it one of two ways. You can click on the icon on your desktop, or you can open up your start menu and just look for IBM SPSS statistics. And then you'll double click on that icon and then it'll start to open up. So it may take a minute. There might be some dialog boxes that pop up. You can just kind of ignore all that. So for instance, whenever you open SPSS, you're going to see this Welcome to IBM SPSS Statistics window. So we really don't need anything here, so we'll just X out of that. The main area that we're going to be working is in this window here. So this window is the IBM SPSS Statistics Data Editor. And this is where we're going to take all that information that we've collected about students on campus, and we're going to put that into SPSS. So the way that this spreadsheet is set up is every row represents a person, and every column represents their answer to one of the questions that were asked of them. So the first person will go in this first row, the second person in the second row, third person in the third row, and so on. And the first column is going to have the responses that everyone gave to the first question. And the second column is going to have the responses everyone gave to the second question, and so on. So if I wanted to enter some information into SPSS, what I would do is I'd start with that first cell, that first response given by that first person. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to minimize this window. So you'll have your SPSS database here, and then what you'll want to do is you want to open up your survey responses. So here I'm going to be using the Campus Fear of Crime survey. So if I scroll down, you'll notice that I've annotated this survey. So here's all the raw responses that people provided. So some student checked this box indicating that when I feel safe, I feel safe walking alone on campus after dark. They tended to agree. Now, when it comes to analyzing data, a lot of times it's a lot easier to work with numbers than it is to work with words. So what we do is we look at the responses people gave and we convert them from words into numbers. So anytime anyone entered the check the box for strongly agree, we're going to replace that with a 2. And anytime they check the box for agree, we replace that with a 1. Neutral gets 0, disagree gets -1, strongly disagree gets a -2. So here I can see that when it comes to the response to this first question, they put in agree, that's going to be a 1. So they'll put that in the first cell. And then for the second cell, we can see that they put in strongly agree. So I'm going to put in a 2. And I'll scroll down a little bit more. And then we can see that they put a neutral, so that's going to be a 0. And then they put in another strongly agree, that's going to be a 2. And then they put in another strongly agree, so 2. And another strongly agree, so that's a 2. And then here we've got another neutral. And then we've got another strongly agree. Okay, so we've entered in all the responses for that first set of questions. And we can just continue in this process. So again, think about the questions, look at the annotations, and replace those words with numbers. So here when it comes to how often are you worried about crime, students could say that they were always, very often, sometimes, rarely, or never. But instead of putting in those words, again, we're going to put in numbers. So if they say they're always worried about a certain offense, they get a 4. Very often, they get a 3. Sometimes they get a 2. Rarely, they get a 1. Never, they get a 0. So just kind of thinking about it for myself. So the number 2 is that middle column. So here's this response to having your home broken into and something stolen. So this person gets a 2. So they sometimes think about that. And then we'll continue scrolling. So they put in another sometimes. So that gets a 2. And they put it in a very often. So that's going to get a 3. And then here they got another 3. And then here they put in a 1. And then here we've got another sometimes, and so we put in a 2. And then here we've got a 1. And there's this question here: have you ever been the victim of crime? Yes or no? If they responded yes, they get a 1. If they responded no, they get a 0. So here they responded no, so we'll put in a 0. And then I've also included some demographic questions. So if their academic class standing is freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior, they get 1, 2, 3, or 4. If it's something other, they get the number 5. And then if it's their gender identity, if they identify as female, they get a 1. Male, they get a 2. If they have a different gender identity, they get a 3. And then for race, 1 is Asian, 2 is Black, 3 is American Indian / Alaska Native, 4 is Hawaiian Native / Pacific Islander, 5 is white, and 6 is other. So we've included these spaces for people to fill in how they identify themselves. And sometimes this information is really valuable. In this course, we're just going to ignore it for the moment. I'm not saying it's not important. It is important information. All data is precious. But in this course, we're going to focus more on quantitative methods. So we want to focus on the different categories and the different numbers that represent those categories. So you don't have to worry about entering in that information about that the students typed in. But what you do want to focus on is make sure that there's a number there. So if they said they have some other gender identity, you want to make sure they have the number 3. So here what we'll do is we'll put in this student's academic class standing. So they're a senior, so they get a 4. And they identified as male, so they get a 2. And then their race is Black, so they also get a 2. Okay, so there should be 19 columns here. So when it comes to the Fear of Crime survey, there were 19 different questions, 19 different ways that students can respond. So for this database, we're going to have 19 different columns. So every row is a student, every column represents one of the questions that were asked on the survey. So you want to continue this process. So for every one of your surveys, make sure that every student gets their own row. And then for every column, that's going to be the responses to their questions. Sometimes people are going to get a little bit creative. Sometimes people aren't going to know how to respond. So however you enter in their information for one student, just make sure you do that in a systematic fashion for every other student. So some students might not know what to put down, or they might skip a question or forget about it. So if they do that, if they have a blank in for that question, then just make sure that there's a blank cell in SPSS. So SPSS knows how to handle missing values. So for instance, if this person didn't know or forgot to enter in their academic class standing, I would just leave this cell blank. So if you look at that cell and you look real closely at it, you'll see that there's kind of a dot in it. But technically this is an empty cell. So again, if anyone hasn't entered in any information, just make sure to leave that cell blank and then go over to the next cell. Okay, so once you've entered in all of your information in SPSS, what we want to do is kind of get that information organized. So if you look at the data view tab, so down here at the bottom, and you look at the responses to all of these questions, you can see that for each of these questions, that by default SPSS has given it a name. So for this column, it's calling it var 0001. And for this column here, it's calling it var 00002, and so forth. So when it comes to working with our data, these default names aren't really helpful. So if I looked at this first column and I saw all the responses everybody gave to that first question, and it's just labeled var 00001, well, that's not really going to tell me what that information in that first column means. So a lot of times what we want to do is we want to replace that default variable name with something that's more meaningful to us. So the way I recommend you do this is you'll open up your annotated survey and you make sure that the names you create are pretty similar to the questions that were being asked on the survey. So when it comes to this column, when it comes to creating these names, you want to use short names. So 1 to 2 words is going to be sufficient. So here we're talking about responses to feeling safe while walking alone on campus after dark. So when it comes to this first column, this first variable, this first set of responses to the survey, I'm going to replace var 00001 with something a little more meaningful. So in this case, I'm going to do SF for safety feeling, and then an underscore, and then I'm going to type in the location. So campus, underscore, and then I'll use the letters AD for after dark. So then I'll continue this process for all of the variables. So here we have another one that's safety feeling, so SF underscore campus underscore, and then this one's about during the day. So here I might just put in the letter D for day. So you'll want to continue in this fashion. So for every one of your variables, every one of your columns of information in your spreadsheet, you'll want to change the default name to something that's a little more meaningful. So here we have SF, and here we're talking about the parking areas, and again we're talking after dark. Now, if you notice, when it comes to these short variable names that I'm entering in, I'm not using spaces between the words, I'm using an underscore. And the reason for that is that when it comes to SPSS, you just aren't allowed to use spaces. So for example, if I type in SF space parking space during the day and I hit enter, I'm going to get this dialog box here. So what they're saying is that the variable name contains an illegal character. So you just can't use blank spaces when naming your columns. So instead what you want to do is you want to use underscores. So again, I could do SF underscore parking underscore during the day. So if we go back to this data view tab, what we'll see here is we've replaced those hard to understand default variable names with ones that are a little bit more meaningful. So here I have SF campus AD, SF campus D, SF parking AD, and SF parking D. So this first column here is going to contain everybody's responses about how safe they feel on campus after dark. And then the second column here is going to contain everybody's responses about how safe they feel on campus during the day, and so forth. So there really are two big tabs when working with data here in SPSS. You have your data view tab, which shows the data that you've entered in from your surveys. And then we've got this variable view tab. So you can think about this variable view tab as like metadata about your data. So in this first tab here, we have a row for every student, and a column for every question that they've answered. And in this variable view tab, we have a row for every question we've asked. And then each column represents information about those questions. So here we have this first row. So this contains metadata for that column of responses. about safety feeling on campus after dark. So we can already see in this name column, these are all the names of the variables. So the name for this first variable is SF Campus AD. Now we can also add some additional information. So in addition to these short names, sometimes it helps just to have the full question there. So I might start working with this data, and then months later, I might look at it again, and I'll look at that short name, and I'll say to myself, I don't remember what that name means anymore. Or maybe I take my database and I give it to somebody else, and that person is going to use my data and do their own analysis. Well, they might look at that short name and have no idea what it means. So what can be really helpful is to include more information about what that question was asking. So that goes in this label column. So if you ever want to make any of these columns a little wider, you can just kind of click on that space in between the two columns and then drag it, and that should widen the column. So here I can widen this label column. And what I like to put in here are basically the actual question that was asked, the full question that was asked of the students. So here what I'll do is, for this first row, I'm going to type in, I feel safe walking alone. And for this particular question, it's on campus after dark. So if anyone ever looks at that first variable name, the SF Campus AD, and they have no idea what it means, they can then just look at this label and see, oh, it means I feel safe walking alone on campus after dark. So I'll do the same thing for the second question. So we have SF Campus D. So that stands for I feel safe walking alone on campus during the day. So I'll just continue in this fashion. So just start at the top, and for each one of your variables, you want to make sure that there's the full question that was asked, that it's represented in this label category. So here we have two variables, SF Campus AD, SF Campus D, and for each one we have additional information. So we have the full question that was asked. So it's really important to have metadata. It just makes it easier for us to remember things in the future, and it makes it easier for other people to collaborate with us. So that's the general process. So you'll get organized, you'll create a working directory, you'll use that to save all of your database files, and then you'll start entering your information from your raw surveys into SPSS. So you go to this data view tab, every person gets a row, get responses, get a column, and then you'll go to this variable view tab and you'll include some metadata. So in this example, we'll keep things really simple. So just make sure you change all of the variable names for each of the columns, and then make sure you include labels for each of those columns as well. So in this case, I want you guys to include the full question that was asked of the students that responded. Now, once you've entered your information, it's really important to save your work. So SPSS is kind of old-fashioned, so it requires you to save your work on your own. So what you want to do is you'll click on this file, and then you'll click on Save As. And then you'll get this Save Data As window. Now, sometimes it doesn't open up exactly where your working directory is. So in my case, it does. But if you ever are trying to get to your working directory, all you need to do is look at this Look In drop-down menu. And you might have to scroll up a bit. But then I would say, then go to the folder that contains your Soc 305 folder. So in this case, I've saved it to the Documents folder. And then I might need to scroll a little bit. So it's in here somewhere. So I go to my Soc 305 folder. Then I go into that folder, and then I'll see my working directory. So then I double click on my working directory. So, some people aren't really in the habit of naming their files, but again, in this course, we're gonna have so many files that it really pays to be organized. You wanna make sure that you're using the right information, the right data when you're doing your work. So since there are gonna be so many files, I highly recommend that you guys, when you name your files, you give them meaningful names. So in this case, I would name the file Soc 305. That way remember what course is this file for. And then I would also include some information about, well, what's your research on? So here I might type in the letters FOC for fear of crime. And then I also might include a word to just remind me about, well, what kind of information is in this file? Well, it's a database file. And then after I've done that, usually I'll use some kind of indicator to make sure I know that this file is different. So you might decide in the future to go out and survey more students on campus. So you've already got your database, but you might want to make it bigger. Well, if that's the case, then you want to make sure that you can recognize the difference between the old database and the new database. So in this situation, I might just enter in a date. So here I'll put in the day's date. So it's 2023-1/22. And then I'll click save. So if you go to your working directory, you'll see that you now have this file, this SOCH 305 Fear of Crime database that was created this year, 2023, January 22nd. So if you ever need to access this information again, all you have to do is double click on this file and it'll open up SPSS and you can access your data. Okay guys, so that's the video for the week. So what we did is we got organized, we went into a computer and we created a system of folders so we could save all the files that we're going to need to be successful in this course. So there are going to be a lot of files, so it really pays to be organized, really pays to put them into folders and to make sure that each file has a meaningful name to it. We then opened up SPSS and we took our raw survey data and we started entering that information into SPSS. We also did some light data management, so we changed all the variable names and then we added meaningful labels in case we ever need to figure out what it is those variable names actually mean. So that's it for the video. In the next series of videos, we'll talk about some more data management tips and tricks and activities that you can do to better prepare your data for analysis. And when it comes to this assignment, the rest of the assignment is now up to you.